Hey beauty babes, welcome to my channel. I'm Maria, aka Agape Love Girl. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today I'm going to be sharing my first impressions of the Urban Decay Ultraviolet palette. I was sent this in PR, but as usual, all my thoughts and opinions are my own and always honest with you guys. It doesn't matter if I was sent something for free or if I purchased it myself. If you are new here, I just wanted to let you guys know that, but those who are familiar with me and my channel already know that about me. So with that being said, I will have a demo to share with you, some swatches, another look, and I'll kind of do a rundown of the shadows and things like that, and then I will go ahead and share my first impressions. I will have timestamps in the description box so you guys can skip forward to any part you're most interested in. But with that being said, I want to keep this intro brief. We're going to roll right into the demo. To start off, I'm going to go ahead and prime my eyes with the Urban Decay Eyeshadow Primer Potion. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and start off by grabbing the shade Optimize, which is that matte pastel purple shade. I'm going to go ahead and use the brush that came in the palette. I'm going to go ahead and use the fluffier side and see if I can start packing that shadow into my crease. It looks very, very light, so I'm not sure how much is going to show up, so I'm just going to kind of pack at my crease and I'll blend it afterwards. Yeah, that is very, very light. Alright, now that I've built it up as much as I think it'll be able to build up, I'm going to take a fluffy blending brush. This is the Beauty Junkies Pro Tapered Blending, and just kind of softly blend and diffuse that up and out so it doesn't look too harsh. I think I'm going to pick up a little bit more of the product on this brush too. Alright, now I'd like to see if I could deepen this up a little bit. I'm going to take a smaller blending brush. This is the Beauty Junkies Pro Crease, and I'm going to go into the shade Purple Dust. I'm going to kind of start lightly because this does have some kind of shimmer sparkle stuff in it, and I don't want to get too much fallout since I do have the rest of my face on first, so I'm just going to kind of lightly start dabbing and patting it on, and then I'll kind of blend. But I'm going to take this just kind of right in my crease, not as high up as I brought the shade Optimized. Well, thankfully there doesn't seem to be much fallout, so that's a good thing. Alright, now I do want to lay down a shade for my lid, but I have a feeling they're going to need a little bit of help, so I'm just going to go ahead and grab a little bit more of the Urban Decay Eyeshadow Primer, place that on my lid where I want to lay down the shadow, and just place that on the lid where I want to lay down the shadow next. Once I do that, I'm going to go ahead and use a brush to kind of help lay it down and blend it in, and then I'm going to go ahead and pick up the shade Euphoric and lay that right on top. This is a really pretty kind of duochrome-y purple shade. Alright, now that that's laid down, I do want to go ahead and deepen it up a little bit more. So I'm just going to go back into that shade Purple Dust with the brush that came with the palette. And I'm just going to use the smaller kind of rounded pencil brush side and just kind of add a little bit of depth there in the outer corner. And I'm probably going to go ahead and just bring that shade to my lower lash line as well. And really quick, just to show you guys like the difference, and I'm sure you guys probably know, but I just think it's sometimes interesting to note and kind of stop and look at the difference my eyes look from adding a little bit of darkness and depth into the look versus the side that I hadn't done that to yet. Both of them look really nice. You can wear them either way, but you can see how just adding a little bit more depth and darkness to the look brings a little bit more definition to the eyes, and I really like the way that looks. But both of these ways look really great. Sometimes it's just nice to stop and take a look at, you know, each step you do and what it does and adds to the look. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Alright, and then lastly for the shadows, I'm going to go ahead and grab the shade Lucid for my inner corner highlight. This is a really fun shade. It's kind of this iridescent shade. It's really pretty. Kind of white with a little bit of a tealy green shift, but it pairs really well with these purples. And I'm just going to take that on the Beauty Junkies Pro pencil brush to apply. Alright, and to wrap up this look, I'm going to go ahead and apply the LA Girl Shockwave Liner in the shade Fresh. It's a really pretty minty colored eyeliner, and I think it'll pair well with that inner corner pop. And then I'm just going to go ahead and use the Urban Decay Perversion Mascara to complete the look. Alright, and that wraps it up for this look. And just in case anyone is curious what is on my lips, I just want to keep it simple with a gloss. So I just went ahead and threw on the Tarte Maracuja Glossy Lip Oil, which is just this sheer light pink gloss. But that wraps it up for this little demo tutorial. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. Alright, now that the demo is done, I'd like to share some swatches with you guys. I know not everybody loves swatches, and they mean different things to different people. I personally do like to see swatches because I feel like you get a better sense of the colors, how they look like on skin versus how they look in the palette. Sometimes shadows can look a little bit different in palette versus on the eyes, on the skin, and things like that. But I will say that I don't always put my trust in swatches. Sometimes shadows can swatch beautifully on the skin and look great with your fingers, but don't perform as well in the eyes, and vice versa. Sometimes they can swatch horribly with your fingers or on your hand, but perform beautifully on the eyes. It's always different, but I still like seeing them and sharing them, and I'm going to try to do this pretty quickly, but I will kind of run down the colors, let you know a little bit about them and how they are looking, just to make sure you guys get a kind of true sense of the colors that might not be picking up on camera. So with that disclaimer out of the way, let's go ahead and roll into the swatches. Alright, the first four shades I have to show you are Trippin', Mind Slip, Dazed, and Hacked. We have two mattes here. The shade Trippin' appears matte in the pan, but it's definitely a little bit more of a kind of satiny kind of a shade. Mind Slip is matte, and Hacked is matte. And then Dazed is a really pretty shade. Kind of like this golden peachy color. I really like it. It is a little bit more of a hard pressed shadow, but seems to apply or at least swatch very nicely, and is a really beautiful shade, I think. Alright, the next four swatches are some of the more interesting shades in this palette in my opinion. So you have VR. This looks a little bit more brown in the pan, but it's it does have this kind of minty teal sparkle glitter to it. It makes it a very unique, interesting color. So once it's actually applied onto the lid or swatched out, as you can see on my hand, it takes on a little bit more of a pinky color with that minty blue sparkle shift to it. It's really, really pretty. I feel like on these swatches on camera, it is looking a little bit more brown as it appears in the pan, but I don't know, I think that's what makes it such an interesting color, because it has this kind of browny, pinky, minty shift. It's a very interesting color, kind of hard to explain. Hopefully you guys can see it well here on camera. And then the next one you're going to see is Lucid. This is a shade I used for my inner corner today, and it's a really beautiful, just iridescent shade. I think iridescent describes it perfectly. Most things that are iridescent, like iridescent glitter, definitely has a little bit more of this minty teal shift to it, with a slight hint of like a pinky purple shift as well. It's a very beautiful, interesting color. Looks mostly white, but has that colorful shift to it. Really pretty. Then next up we have Optimize, which is that matte light violet or kind of pastel purple shade. And then lastly for these swatches we have Warning, and this is kind of an interesting shade. This one looks a little bit more on the pinky side, pinky purple with a kind of violet purple shift to it. So I would imagine this is a little bit of a duochrome shade, but interestingly enough, I feel like this is a shade that Urban Decay has had before and brings back here and there in new palettes. But previously it was named Fishnet. Now I don't know if it's exactly the same as Fishnet. That is a shadow that I used to have in an old Urban Decay palette, but I don't have that palette anymore. But I was reminded of it when I swatched this and saw it. I was like, I recognize this, and I remember doing a blog post about it. Sorry, I'm in a rabbit trail. Comparing it to other shadows. Anyways. I feel like this is very similar, if not the same shade, just redone, renamed. Anyway, so the new name is Warning, but if you guys remember at all the shade Fishnet, that's what this reminds me of. So it's kind of funny how Urban Decay sometimes recycles colors and things like that in new palettes. So if that was a shade you liked from the past, you might be excited to see it in here. Alright, and the last four swatches we have are Cyberpunk. This is a pretty shade, I think. It's a little bit of a kind of metallic-y purple, maybe more so of a shimmer or a satiny. I think it's like wanting to be metallic, but it's not quite hitting the mark. But it does have some pretty pink kind of shimmer or glitter to it. Not chunky glitter, but pink shimmer to it. So it has a little bit of a kind of fun shift to it. Next up is the shade Euphoric, which is a purple with a little bit of a blue shift. A very shimmery, pretty shade. And the next one is Purple Dust, which is a little bit of a purpley metallic, but with a very dark, maybe black base. I feel like if you blended this one too much, it would probably look a lot more black. It does have that kind of purple color to it with some like pink, maybe some gold sparkle in there, I'm not quite sure. So it's an interesting color, but it's definitely a dark grungy shade. And the last one is Digital, which looks kind of like a, I don't know, bronzy brown. It kind of has a little hint of purple to it, but not much, more so a brown kind of shade. All right, now that you guys have seen the swatches, let's go ahead and kind of talk about the two looks that I created. So the tutorial I filmed today for this video, this is the second look that I have created with this palette. So I have a little idea of my thoughts and opinions on the shadow so far. So I'll go ahead and just really quickly break down the look I have on today, just since you guys were able to watch the tutorial and you can kind of see for yourself how things perform, but I'll just share kind of my thoughts and opinions on each of the shadows. So I started out with the shade Optimize, which is that matte kind of pastel-y purple shade. Interestingly enough, even though this is a matte, it kind of seems a little bit of more of a satiny shade. I didn't seem like a true matte to me. Not that that necessarily matters, but I just thought that was something worth mentioning. It makes it seem a little bit creamier, and I felt like it blended very nicely, but the downside to that is that I feel like it didn't build up super well. Like, I did build up the color a little bit and I felt like I got decent pigmentation, but there are other shadows like this, and I'll talk about it a little bit later, more towards my first impressions of this palette, how there's other shadows where it's like the same kind of color, and it starts off light, but you can build it up and it'll almost get a little bit darker, if that makes sense. Whereas this one, I felt like you can build up the richness of the color, but it doesn't quite get deeper. So I don't know if that matters to anybody else. It didn't super matter to me, but it would have been nice to be able to have that shadow deepen up just a little smidge. I know it's a pastel light color, but I don't know. In my mind, I was thinking I was seeing other shadows deepen up a little bit more, but this one didn't quite. But still blended really nicely, was very smooth, creamy, and easy to work with. Next up, I went in with the shade Purple Dust. This one is a little bit more hard pressed, and so I did start very lightly just because I didn't want to get too much fallout since I did have my face done first. And the upside is I don't feel like I got very much fallout. There was a little bit, but not, it was very, very minimal, which that's a good thing. But I did feel like it did require me to build it up quite a bit because this shadow is very, very hard pressed. It is pretty. It did create some depth to this look, and I really like that. But I don't know, there's something about a lot of these shadows, and I'll probably talk about it again a little bit later in the first impressions, that are a little bit more hard pressed, so that's not my preference. So I feel like they're a little bit more difficult to work with, like you're not getting the pigmentation right off the bat. So I don't love that about these, but anyways, it eventually does build up and work, and you know, I created this nice look. Then I went in with the shade Euphoric. This one seemed hard pressed, and I didn't try it on its own. Usually I like to try a shadow on its own before using setting spray or anything else to kind of help it, to see how it performs on its own. I probably should have done that, but I just had a feeling it was going to be a little bit difficult because it's a more of a drier, hard pressed shadow. So I did go ahead and use some of the Urban Decay Primer Potion first to lay it down, and then put that on top, and I feel like it laid down really, really nicely. The color is very vibrant, it's pretty, and so overall I like that. I thought it performed nicely, but again, it did have a little bit of an aid to it. So then the only other shade I used was Lucid, which is that inner corner color. Really beautiful color. I like that it's in here. I think it's kind of a unique twist to a purple palette to have this kind of minty green teal color in there, but it's very complementary. It's really pretty. I like it in this palette. So now for the very first look I created, I'll go ahead and put some pictures on the screen so you guys can see it, and I'll just kind of run through that as well. So for this one, I used a few more of the shades from the brown side of the palette. I wanted to use those shades first for my first look because I knew I wasn't going to record it. I figured for the one I record, I wanted to do a very purple look since this is like a purple palette, but I did want to test out some of those brown shades. So I started off first with the shade Hacked, which is kind of this mid-tone, cool, light brown shade, matte brown shade. I put that in my crease, and then I felt like I just wanted some depth to it. I needed a little to deepen up because it is a very, very light shade. So I went ahead and went in with the shade Digital. Used that to deepen it up. That worked pretty well. This is a very hard pressed shadow as well, but it worked to deepen up this look. I used that in my outer corner as well as my lower lash line. Then I did go ahead, oh, I actually went in with Cyberpunk in my crease second. Sorry, I used Digital. That was the third shade I used to really deepen up the outer V and lower lash line. But I went in with the shade Cyberpunk to try to deepen up my crease and add a little bit of purple to that brown shade Hat, because I didn't want the first look to be too brown. I wanted some of the purples in there. So I did use Cyberpunk to kind of deepen it up, and I feel like I did a good job, but because it is a little bit more of a shimmery, like sparkly shade, it kind of took over and definitely made the look very, very purple. So anyways, and then I wanted to try out the shade VR, because this is such a unique, such a pretty shade. If you guys watched the swatch portion of this video, you can see just how interesting this shadow is. It looks very brown in the pan, but it kind of surprised me once I put out my lid. It kind of looks, and you'll probably see in the photos, it almost looks like a pink shadow, which is really interesting because it's kind of this brown shade with some minty blue-green sparkle reflect to it. So it's very, very interesting how it kind of shifts pink almost. So I really like that shade. It's a little bit more of a like flakier shade, but applies really, really nicely. When I used this shadow, I also did use the Urban Decay Eyeshadow Primer Potion, like as in like I put a little bit more down before I put that shadow on top just to help, because this one is, like I said, a little bit more flaky. I imagine it would have a little more fallout, so I wanted something to have it to stick to. So I placed that down and put that shadow on top of it, and it worked really nicely, really beautifully. I actually really like this shade. Even though this is supposed to be a purple palette, I kind of like that it has some of these interesting brown shades in it, that it's not too boring. So that's a really beautiful shade, had no issues with it. And then I felt like I kind of brought, when I used Cyberpunk into my crease, I felt like I brought that shade a little bit higher than I wanted to for that look that day. So I did go ahead and use the shade Trippin', which, as I said in the swatches, looks kind of like a matte shade, but it's a little bit more like a satin shade, and it's actually very, very pigmented. It's really nice. So I used that for my brow bone, and just to do a little bit of a cleanup, a blending to blend down and tone down the purple a notch. So that's my brow bone, but it's hard to tell in these photos because it really looks like, you know, a similar color to my skin tone. But anyways, just want to mention that I use that, and it's a very nice shadow. And then same thing as I did today, I use Lucid, that iridescent shade for my inner corner pop. And so I thought it created a really beautiful look. Simple, both these looks I created are very, very simple, but I just kind of wanted to get a feel for the palette and use a variety of shadows to be able to talk about and share my thoughts and opinions on them. So that's kind of a breakdown on both of the looks that I've created so far with this palette. And I'm not sure how you feel about this portion of the video of me breaking down the looks and things like that and the shadows, but I find that it can be a little bit helpful to be able to break down the looks and the shadows I've used and let you guys know my thoughts and opinions on how each of those shadows performed, especially since I'm not creating tutorials and video, you know, tutorials, demos with each of these looks, but I can kind of break down the looks and let you guys know how each of them perform. So I find that a little bit helpful, and also helps me kind of think about my thoughts and opinions and help with my review on these shadows and this palette in general. But anyways, with all that being said, let's go ahead and move into my first impressions, thoughts on this palette. So I will say that I think this is a cute palette. I like the color story. I think it's fun. I'm sure a lot of people were disappointed that Urban Decay has come out with a purple palette and there are so many browns in here, but I feel like I say this in kind of in defense of all of the Urban Decay Naked palettes, but it's just true. It's like, they're the Naked palettes. You can't really expect them to be full-on color palettes. I mean, would that be great? Yes, of course, but they are the Naked palettes, and I feel like the Naked palettes are always going to be a palette that is a little bit more on the neutral side. It's going to be something that's going to merge neutral with color, especially since they're coming out with these more colorful type of Naked palettes. I feel like the Naked palettes are for those who maybe are new to color or just getting into color, or want to kind of dip their toes into colors but still want to have it be a little bit safe. And I think it's this kind of Naked palette, and all the Naked palettes are kind of perfect for that. They have a little bit of the neutral safe zone and then a little bit of fun color and things like that too. So I never super get mad about the Naked palettes being too neutral or too whatever, because they're Naked palettes. That's what they are. So that doesn't ever really bother me or surprise me at this point, and it really shouldn't surprise any of us either. So Urban Decay comes out with all kinds of other types of palettes where I feel like they can have other colors shine, but the Naked series is always going to be just that, the Naked series. So I'm not too mad about it or surprised, like I said, or even disappointed. I think this is a cute color story. I love that they made it a little bit interesting and fun, like I already mentioned, with this kind of pop of iridescent tealy minty blue shade in here. I think it's a fun color, and I like that even though they do have some of these neutrals in here, they're not like just super boring. These two shades, VR and Dazed, are really pretty and kind of unique. I really enjoy them, and so I think overall it's a cute little palette, but I will say that right off the bat I have a feeling this won't be one of the Nakeds that's among my favorites. I definitely have my favorites. I would say the Naked Honey is among my favorites, and the Naked Cherry. Those two I think would be my top two if I had to pick favorites of the Naked palette. And close behind that would probably be the Naked Heat palette. I love the color stories of all three of those, and I feel like the quality of the shadows in those are just really good. I don't know how they're different, but they seem very, very different to me compared to some of the other palettes like this one. This one, I think the quality, well, I don't even want to say the quality, because it's not the quality's bad, but I feel like the shadows themselves are very much so hard pressed. And honestly, it's reminding me a lot of the Naked 3 palette, which you guys may have heard me talk about before, and how I've said that's probably one of my least favorites, or maybe it is my least favorite Naked palette, just because I felt like the quality of those shadows, they're just so hard pressed, they're very hard. So I don't love them, and this kind of reminds me of a lot of these shadows are a little bit more harder pressed, a little bit not difficult to work with, but take a little bit more to build up. You're not getting that bam pigmentation that I would want or expect. You know, you see a color in the pan and you expect it to show up just like that in your eyes, and some of these you have to kind of build up to get to that pigmentation, and so I don't love that about this palette. So I feel like this is kind of there a little bit, with the Naked 3 being like one that I don't think I'll gravitate towards very often, but honestly don't think it's as bad as the Naked 3, but it reminds me a lot of the the shadow quality of the Naked 3, which is, like I said, not my favorite. Aside from that, the other thing I don't really love about this palette is that I wish there were at least one more matte, and I really wish that there was like a dark purple matte shade in here. One thing, and again, this is something that doesn't quite surprise me either, is like a lot of the Naked palettes are really shimmer focused. There's not a lot of mattes, and I kind of realized this when I pulled out in my previous makeup baskets last month and a little bit this month some of the original Naked palette, the Naked 2 and the Naked 3 again, and I realized after using those palettes that they're very shimmer focused. There's not a lot of mattes, which for me I feel like makes it a little bit more difficult to create a wider variety of looks. Not that you can't use shimmers in the crease and things like that. I know a lot of people do, but I am someone who I prefer to use more mattes in the crease, or just have more matte options. And considering the 3 true mattes you have in here are such light shades, so the mattes you have in here are Mind Slipped, Hacked, and then the purple, light purple one here, Optimized, and even that one seems a little bit more satiny, like I mentioned. They're so light, so you really can't create any depth with this palette unless you go into some of these shimmer shades, and they do work to create some depth, as you saw in this look, and I did it with my first look, but it would have been really nice to have another matte shade in here, and it be a dark purple, so you could create some depth with color. I honestly feel like if they were to remove any shade in here and replace it with that matte dark purple, they could have gotten rid of this shade Digital. I kind of feel like this shade almost seems like an afterthought. Yes, it's the deepest shade in here, so you can use it to create some depth with a look, but I feel like, I don't know, it's like this weird brown. It has maybe a little hint of purple to it, but it's like this weird brown that almost seems like an afterthought in this palette. I think it would have been so much more thoughtful and better if this shade were replaced with a dark matte purple shade, and it would have made this palette so much better in my opinion. But what can you do? I don't really know what making critiques like this or what you would change about a palette does really. It's not that helpful. It's nothing to be changed now, but I'm just saying I think that would have made this palette a little bit better, maybe brought it up a notch in my opinion. So for those couple of reasons, this palette isn't one that I would say is a favorite of mine. It's not a terrible palette. I think it's a nice palette. I think it's cute, but I don't know. I'm just kind of feeling okay about it. I'm always very grateful for Urban Decay or any brand when they send me products, but like I said in the beginning, just because a brand sends me something for free doesn't mean it's going to be an instant hit. It's going to be a favorite and I'm going to rave only rave about it. You know, I always try to be honest and share my true opinions, and my opinions on this is that it's just okay. I think if it's a palette that speaks to you, you like the colors, if you're just kind of dipping your toes into color, this might be something you want to grab because there's a little bit of the neutrals, a little bit of color, and if you're really big into purples and you wear them a lot, you might really enjoy this palette. I don't think it's crazy difficult to work with, but it's, like I said, not my favorite among some of the other Naked palettes or other shadow palettes from Urban Decay. But I would say though that if you are just wanting to get into purple shadows and you already have a lot of neutrals, I would recommend another palette. And I hate to do this in my you know, little first impressions of the Urban Decay palette, but I just have to, I can't not. I would recommend a different palette. It's gonna be smaller. I think it's only like $13 and they always have sales, but I would actually recommend the Juvia's Place The Violets palette. This only has 6 shades and only 2 of them are matte, so it's really not that different from this palette where there's only really the one matte purple in here. This one has a very similar shade, and this is the one I was mentioning earlier when I was kind of doing an overview of the looks I created. This shade here, oh, these ones don't have names, but there's this one, as you can see, it's very similar to the shade Optimized right here. I'm just gonna go and swatch them and see how they compare. But anyways, I remember being really pleasantly surprised by the Juvia's Place palette. I'm gonna swatch this here. About, even though that's a really light shade, a light purple shade, it builds up really well. Like, it started out when I first applied it really light, but as I applied a little bit more and built it up, the shade deepened up just a little bit. Obviously not much deeper than you could go than this, but I was surprised that it could be darkened up a little bit, you know. It was really surprising to me. So that's why I was kind of comparing it to that. Okay, this isn't going to probably swatch very well, but I'll link the video I did where I use this palette. Like I said in the swatches, sometimes shadows will swatch horribly but perform beautifully on the eyes. Anyways, there's a built-up swatch. So you kind of see, even there, like, it was a little bit lighter, you build up the swatch, and even with a brush, because I used it with the brush on my eyes, and you can kind of get a little bit of a deeper color. So I just love that. But they're very similar in color, and you can get this kind of a lighter color if you go in very light-handed, or you can build it up and get it a little bit deeper, and I love that. And then of course this does have this darker purple shade, which I thought actually performed really, really beautifully. I talk about that in my video with this, so you guys can watch that there. I will say that I have heard kind of mixed reviews. Some other people have said that the purples in here weren't as good. Well, actually I really only heard one other person say that. That was Katie Marie. So it kind of surprised me. She had some difficulties with it because I felt like these performed really great, especially for purple shadows, which are notoriously difficult to make and perform. You know, sometimes they're just more likely to perform not so well, but this one performed so beautifully for me. Really pigmented and stuff. And then you have these 4 actual true metallic purple shades that are just stunning, and it's a very affordable palette. So if you were really just into purples and you didn't need any more of the neutral shades, I would say just grab this one. it's affordable, it's beautiful. You don't need to spend like whatever the Naked palettes are, like they're usually like $48 to $54, so super expensive. Like I said, unless you really wanted some of these neutral shades that are really beautiful. So if you wanted kind of like an all-in-one palette, or you know, if you didn't have a big collection or whatever, this might be really great for you. The packaging beautiful, sturdy, just as typical as Naked palettes are. I don't think it's a horrible palette, but I think if you're looking for just the color and a more affordable option, this is the route to go. But anyways, it's really up to you. I'm just here to give you guys the info, show you guys it in action, and hopefully you guys can make use of the info I'm sharing here with the swatches and the demo and things like that, and then decide for yourself if this is something you want or need in your makeup collection, in your life, and things like that. So I do hope you guys found this video helpful and informative. If you did, I would love for you guys to consider giving it a thumbs up, leave a comment letting me know your thoughts and opinions, and consider sharing this with your friends on your social media, because it really helps me and to boost my video and things like that. So anyways, with all that being said, I just want to thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, much love and hugs to you. Bye, beauty babes. Mwah!